Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's special guest is Jole Berlage-Buccellatti. And she is a trauma-informed specialist that works in transforming leadership and through her coaching activities and more. And we're going to dive into that in just a minute. I guarantee you, you will love the conversation. We'll be right back. Yole, it
Yeah, thanks
is
for
so
having
good
me.
to be here. No,
Yeah,
you're very welcome. We're just leaping right in, right? So
yeah,
the design of our conversations is to kind of expose what goes on inside because we're bereft of these conversations most of the time for fear that we're going to be deemed crazy, insane, weird, or something of such. And so we don't really talk about how we find our connection or connections in life. And so we're going to explore that. You with your background, you've got music, you've got dance, you've got these trauma-informed skill set of how to move through things more effectively, and all of this really focuses around changing your vibration. And we mentioned that earlier. You asked if how I found you. Was it through frequency? And I had to admit, yes, that's true. So acknowledging that, how did you first find your connection with that inner vibe? And how was life like for you in the process of getting comfortable with it?
yeah. Interesting question. So I think I was born with it and then I lost it. And let me explain. And that is, I remember being maybe, I grew up in the countryside and we had horses and dogs, and my father had a huge garden. And I remember sitting in a special part of the garden and seeing that everything around me was animate and seeing and feeling it and just knowing it. Um, and to me, that was totally normal. And I had somebody I kept talking to. I never told anybody, but that was, I now know that that was a guide. And at a certain point, I turned that off. It just, you go to school and you have no one to talk to about these things.
Mhm. Well, your attention is distracted into other things, right? As a kid without responsibilities and the choices in the educational programs and things like that, we tend to just be in the moment.
Well, it was really, for me, it was also, I never stopped having that connection with animals.
Hmm.
So that remained, but because I could not openly talk about it, um, other than possibly with my dad, I just shut up about it. And by doing that, I shut it down in myself to a
Sure.
very high degree.
Before you did that, though, what kind of conversations did you have with yourself about it?
Um, I don't know if I had conversations about it. For me, it was just the truth. It
Hmm.
was simply the way it was.
Were there things that you noticed that edified that awareness?
Well, it was obvious to me that the plants and the energy, and I would say I saw fairies, but I don't know how much that was true or not. To me, that was reality.
Sure. Well, there's evidence that that is a reality, and it's called the imaginal world, right? In
Mm,
that liminal space, I believe it's what it's called. It's in between the physical and the etheric, right? There's that segue from one to the other, or that liminal space is what it's called, where the two are able to interact, and you're aware of it. We
yeah,
often, as kids, see things, feel things, hear things, and have conversations with others that then kind of dissipate because as we get older, we start dealing with adults that haven't maintained their connection
Yeah,
and
I haven't
have gotten
maintained.
caught up in the world, right?
Yeah, or also don't talk about it. Um, so it took me, it took me a really long time until I would say my early 20s when I went to the States to study.
Hmm.
And I met, a lot of people that were more open about what they experienced. That I started to have conversations about these things. And initially I studied biology and anthropology, so I have quite a science background as well.
Hmm.
And,
Very
within
advantageous.
very advantageous. So the artist in me and the scientist in me began a discussion
Or
basically
figuring
who
out how to
had
dance
priority.
together, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did a fair amount of things. And um, then I went to live in London, and London is a place where you can find all kinds of what other people would say strange people and centers. So you could go to places and talk to spirits. You could go to places, people scanning your auras.
Hmm.
You can you could do all kinds of things. So that to me was possibly the most important point of reconnection to that original sense of being in the world. And
Hmm.
then a lot of things that I learned in science and that I experienced as an artist in terms of being connected to, I'm a singer, so when you sing, where does that come from, right? If you don't just sing in a technical way, it
Comes from the
started to make
gut.
sense. Hmm?
Comes from the gut,
Yeah,
the
almost comes
abdomen.
from the
You're taught
soul.
the deep breathing and you know, sing from your gut,
Yeah, but
not
it comes from your
what do they
heart.
call it? Losing your top, right? I've heard it called that because we usually sing from here, but the more you get in touch with it, you sing from your being.
Exactly. You sing from your heart, you sing from your soul, you're just a vessel,
Right.
basically. You just try to be the most perfect instrument for whatever wants to come through.
Hmm.
Um, so things started to make sense again to me. It was like
Now,
a puzzle that had been taken apart and put back together.
that's awesome. And life is like a puzzle, non-linear, and it's easy. Well, it's not always easy to put back together, but you got to be curious enough to do so. Now, in your curiosity, when you were in London and had all of these potentials, possibilities that were reflecting various things back to you, did you find in that exploration that it was self-reflective, that the things that you got from exploring those various, let's call them esoteric arts, for lack of a better, uh, how did that reflect to you? What did you gain from that? What kind of wisdom did you garner about yourself through that process?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing was I'm not crazy.
Ding, ding,
That
ding,
was the
ding.
most ding, 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 ding. And, as we talked before, I don't like saying it that way. I identify as a neurosensitive. I think that I have no better way of saying it, but, being a very, very much neurosensitive
Mhm.
um, individual, a lot
Old
of things
school, we would
started.
call that psychic or psychism.
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah,
but that's
because
an old term that almost automatically puts it on a shelf because we really don't want to understand how that all works.
well, it just made sense in the sort of extra perceptions I had.
Hmm.
I can't see auras or things like that, but I'm very good at knowing what another person feels. I just read their bodies. And I thought that's normal, but it's not. I mean, it's not, run of the mill, let's put it that way.
Very
And
true. And yet, because science is now proving we're all energy, that's a natural ability that we have because we're built that way. We're just never taught how to use it.
That's right. But I used it by default. So it just gave me a sort of sense of, I mean, there were things that I thought were way out. There were things I would say the scientist in me said, I don't know. But whatever I could sort of feel and hear as truth,
Right. Well, you couldn't
even
deny
if it
your own
wasn't,
experience, right? And why would you?
well, not just my own experience, but if it rang true, even if I personally didn't have that experience, like if somebody would say, I can see that and that in your aura, but I
Mhm.
could feel from that
You
person
would
that
sense
it was,
the truth. That's what I'm saying. That yeah, it's not just the direct experience from the outer, it's the inner that
mm,
experience these things which are undeniable.
yes,
Now they're subtle usually, and we often, because of that, will discount them and second guess things and then realize, oh, wait, further on down the line when stuff happens, it's like, oh, I should have listened to myself.
yeah, oh,
How
you
many
bet.
times have you heard that phrase, right? Oh, I should have listened to myself.
Yes. I mean, I can give you countless incidents that when,
Right.
in my life that I now say, man, if I had just trusted that inner voice.
Well, it builds credibility over time,
Yeah,
right?
it
Because
does.
when you do trust it and it shows to be true, then you build the trust.
Yeah.
Now, as kids, though, how did you find in knowing this, and being able to reflect it within yourself, what did you notice in the process with others, the deep sensitivity, the ability that perhaps others had and maybe not, but in those tense situations, right? You done a lot of work with trauma. In that, what are the kinds of things that people that you ran into, first of all, because you had to process everything before you could help others do it, right? What did you find are the similar things that seem to be across the national boundaries, right? Because you lived in Germany and England and States and probably several other places that I'm unaware of. And so there's this multicultural experience that you've had. Do you find it to be that much difference between the cultures, or are there some similarities that we have?
Um, are you referring to this
Natural ability, the
natural
default
ability?
settings, right?
Ah, well, I think the default setting is the same no matter which culture. And I always find that really interesting because if you could be in a room with people from completely different backgrounds, and the ones that have actually understood that we are frequency, that have understood certain truths, they understand each other immediately.
Mhm.
Even if they would wear different clothes or whether they maybe have an emphasis somewhere in a different way,
Sure.
but
There's a vibe.
they will never nitpick on bullshit.
Right.
Never.
Right.
So I always found that so reassuring to know that there is sort of a core inside all of us that if it's not corrupted, it can always speak from the heart and always be understood from the heart.
Agreed. And I've found this is simple, right? We have this default setting, desire, if you will, simply to love and be loved. And that's what it all boils down to, and either our acceptance or denial of that, or our,
Mhm.
fight with ourselves that I'm not worthy of love, or all I want is to be loved kind of thing. Um, how do you see that reflecting in the world at large today, especially coming out of this constriction that we all had recently, the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration, which gave us an opportunity to self-examine? How do you see that self-examination moving forward and the results in others that you're working with?
Well, that is a complex question. So where do I start?
I'm a
Yeah,
complex
talking.
guy. I try to make it simple, but some things are, they start with the
Yeah,
complexity. So how do we boil it down to the simplicity?
that is part of my default system is to see the complexity in things. But
Hmm.
so I was quite a rebel in that time of restriction, because to me, pretty much from the beginning, it didn't make sense. Again, being a
Agreed.
scientist, I looked up things and I was like, excuse me. So that made my life rather difficult in Germany, because in this country, you're either with me or you're against me. And I learned a lot in that time about myself, in the sense of I am not willing to bend myself to such a degree, and I will speak the truth even if it costs me friends
Hmm.
or so-called friends. So it
Interesting
was a
how,
very hard school. It was a very hard school of not compromising on certain things anymore to fit in, which
mhm.
is something that for, neurosensitives or people that are different is always a big issue. So you asked me about trauma. So I would say the biggest trauma in that population all across the world that I've encountered is I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not wanted, because I'm different, because people don't understand me, because they don't even want to understand me.
Or it seems that way.
Yeah, it seems that
Now, do
way
you
many.
think that's a reflection of what we were talking about earlier, that inner self is, if you see me, you're going to think I'm crazy, insane, weird, so you don't bother to expose yourself.
Well, you don't. I mean, I was bullied most of my life severely because I was different.
Hmm.
So at a certain point, you don't go and show yourself anymore. It took me a lot of work to do that. And, as I said, part of that restriction we were in, I had a choice. And the choice was I'm going to bend myself and talk the talk everybody talks to be part of something, or I'm finally going to say, as the French say, ras-le-bol, I've had it. I will not do that.
Right.
I will no longer do that. And that was a huge step of empowerment for me.
Now, is this also when you began to sing and play?
Ah,
Or?
no, I started to sing. Ooh, I started to play piano when I was about 15 or 16.
Hmm.
And I started to be a singer was my biggest wish in life. That was, I wanted to be in stage and sing. But I started that, at Bates College in my early 20s, and I haven't stopped since. But
Oh,
I
good,
had
good.
terrible, terrible performance anxiety
And yet,
for,
once you step into it, and I know I'm not a singer, but being a drummer and giving presentations on stage and things like that, there's this nervousness. I think we all have it. There's anxiety. There's that performance anxiety right before we step on stage. Then once we do, in just a few moments, we're recentered back in ourselves and able to just rely on what what we know to be true, right? The
yeah,
practice, the knowledge, and the delivery, and the vulnerability that takes in that, and at the same time allowing those innate, those default settings, right, to come forth in the music, right? Because music is not about the outer world. It's about the sensations from
mm,
the inner world that you're expressing about it, which gives you the opportunity to just kind of bask in that embrace and
yeah,
lose yourself in it.
absolutely. I would say that now, but then I didn't. I mean,
Oh,
I
sure.
I could not bear my soul, because it was showing who I truly was or who I truly am. And that was the most scary thing on this planet, if you ask me, at that point in time.
Well, yeah, it is for everybody, I think, because you
Mm.
just don't know. You have confidence in yourself, and that builds over time. And until you get that outer reflection of, yeah, I'm appreciated.
I'm heard. I'm
Right.
seen.
Well,
I'm
that's all
loved.
part of it. The appreciation is inclusive of all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How did
Yeah.
you find that transition in moving from that place into the work you're doing now, and the Well, maybe the layers of trauma that you found in yourself and others that seem to be consistent in the process,
Yeah, so um
or are there consistencies? Are there
yes, I
certain
think there
things
are.
that people go through? They may express them differently, right? We're all unique in our experience and neurodiverse kind of thing. And yet it's like a scattergram, there's a line that you can put that kind of brings everything
Hmm.
averages, if you will.
Well, there are a few things. One, just to answer that part of your question, like I said, I always wanted to be a performer, but life just kept nudging and pushing me into the role of a healer. It
Hmm.
just, I thought I could be healing with my voice as a performer, but life kept saying,
There's more.
there's more. And I hope that I can reintroduce the voice soon, into my work in terms of frequencies.
Hmm.
But to that other
Just
part
that
of your question,
intention, the way will be provided from my experience.
mm, yeah, there have been some signs that something from the outside keeps telling me, come on, bring that into the equation. I don't quite know how that's going to happen.
And
So,
you have a sense that it will, is from what I'm picking up.
um, yes,
Sort of.
I think it
Yeah.
will. I think it will. I just don't
You don't know
know the
how.
exact form.
Now, that process right there, dealing with the unknown, the desire, where you put your attention, intention, and interactions without knowing what's about to become. How does that fit into this process of moving from the depths of trauma to something to feeling more connected?
Mm. I think that connection that you and I are talking about, is not a mental connection. And in our society or Western society, we're very much trained to only believe the mental plane.
The intellect.
The
You know that
intellect,
it's funny.
not just
We're all thinkers, and do you know where the word Satan came from, according to the Webster's, collegiate version of the dictionary? The very first reference in it is from the Greek, Thetan, Thetan, meaning thinker.
oh, really? I didn't know that. That is intriguing. That's intriguing.
It's amazing what you find when you get curious.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I didn't know that. That is
You're
interesting.
welcome.
Mm. So the main thing that helped me and helps others is to understand two things. The primary thing is we are energetic beings. We are not doings and we're not thinkings. They're all things that we have available and it's good that we have them, but it's not who we are.
No, we're
And
beings, right?
we are beings, we're energetic beings.
Hmm.
And I think once you understand that as a neurosensitive person, you start to understand why you pick up so many things from this so-called ether, or
Sure.
why do I suddenly know something about a person that is weird? No, it's not. It's just that
It's
you
different, right?
it's
It brings it back into that capacity for sensing rather than thinking. And as I love to say, we cannot think our way through a system built on vibrations. We've got to sense our way through.
yes. And to find confidence in that is to recalibrate to that is really important. So I work on that with my clients, and it was very important for myself to sort of return to a little bit what I described when I was about 4 year old, for the to return to that kind of sense that
Mhm.
I didn't use for a long time.
Right. Be
Um,
as little children, right? And that's the default settings again.
it's that. And the other thing is that I really love, it's a quote by David Grant, who developed brain spotting. And he says, I do not believe in a mind-body connection because I do not believe in a mind-body separation. And it's very subtle, but it's very important.
Sure. Well, it's like the
Because
difference too. Howard Bloom mentioned that, he's a debunker of the second law of thermodynamics, speaking of science, and and immediately it's like, that's how I feel too. It's like we don't, man-made systems fall into entropy. However, universal systems don't. They're constantly refining themselves. And what we feel might be chaos is actually patterns we haven't recognized yet.
yes.
So there's a shift there and we're finding in physics that what we thought is now being questioned, right? Majorly so. There's no more matter. So you can't mind. What you can do is sense and be present. That's it simply, I think. Now, how do we do that? What did you find and I apologize for the interruption, but there's that, these kind of generative conversations when things pop, it's like, you got to share. And I appreciate the ability that we have in doing so.
So I'm sorry, but just remind me of the question.
Oh, sure. Being tangentialist, of which I think we all are to some degree, sometimes we get off on those spirals and forget how to bring it back to the circle, which is what the spirals and create. We see that two-dimensional circle and we think it's just a line. Well, the line's made up of points, and those points are tangents that intersect. Right? We've got all this kinds of stuff going on. The question, I think, was how do you find your methodologies of this trauma to triumph process? Do you see those as layers, as similar processes, as incremental steps that are available and transcended as one becomes aware? How do you see that happening, and what do you see from that? And you may have never thought about this before. This is the nature of apocalyptic chats, right? We uncover knowledge.
No, I have thought about that because, having been around the block for a while, I've had, my fair share of therapy.
Sure.
And most of it didn't do anything for me. So when I started out as a music therapist, and I did, my master's in that in my 50s. So I had this, having been a dancer, having been a musician, having been a scientist, and having understood many things about life, it just seemed to me that the only way to approach trauma is in an integral way, and not an integrative way, in an integral way, by understanding that you have these four elements: the mental, the emotional, the body, the physical, and the energetic, and they're all one. Okay, you could sort of, if you wanted to draw a picture, you could have a sphere, and if you're working on a particular aspect of the trauma, you pull out the physical, cube, if you want
Almost
to.
like a Venn diagram kind of setup.
Yeah, but then you need to put it back together. And if I'm explaining something, or if I'm working on something on the energetic plane, I then need to reintegrate that because the body needs to process it, right? Just because it's sort of happening in our energetic body has repercussions for our physical body that need to be respected, right? And the other way around, if I work on the mental plane, that affects my energetic system. And that was something I found was missing in most therapies that I had either been, I would say, subjected to or studied, that they always by default just looked at one part of the human system.
Sure.
When I was building my system, I was consciously building something that included all four aspects. So when I work with trauma, it's, for example, the body memory, the soma, the body is immensely important, because many times in former times, people used to work, 50, 60 years ago, they worked with words a lot on trauma. And words are in a part of most of what language does is, to be very simple, is left hemisphere. Okay, most of it. But left hemisphere has a problem that it's not really connected to your body. But most of the memory of trauma sits in your body. So you need to actually know, if you're working with trauma, what belongs where into those 4 categories. And the knowingness that if I work with one, I need to check what's happening in the other. So
they all affect each other in the process
they will
because
affect each other
synergistic
because
nature
it's
of the
one.
wholeness, right?
Yeah, it's one.
Yeah.
We're only taking them apart for the purpose of being able to address a certain aspect of it, but not because one of the planes holds the key for all the others. There's a hierarchy when you work with trauma. In general, you have to work with the body and the energy system first.
Sure.
But if you leave it there, there's something missing.
Now, does that generally come through addressing events, or is it does it go to a sense or a feeling of rather than a memory?
Well, it depends. A lot of trauma is in the unconscious plane, meaning if it's very early trauma, let's say you were a year or 2 years old, you didn't have language. So it's
just
used to the
embedded as a
surprise.
feeling, right?
It's embedded as a feeling, and it's embedded in your muscles, in your ligaments, in your fascia, but it's also embedded in your belief system, because that's how we learn, right? You learn this
Right.
is life. That
Right.
experience,
And
that
what may
experience,
be
that.
love to one in a loving, unconditionally loving environment, which is wholesome, right? And you feel belong, you feel like you belong. Whereas if you're in a trauma-filled environment, that understanding of love is going to be completely different because you're going to
Yeah,
expect the trauma as proof of the love.
exactly. So you learn the world is not safe and I'm not safe. So let's imagine, you're this neurosensitive child that is so wide open and maybe still really connected to these other worlds. And then you come into an environment where that is actually detrimental to you because you have no, it's very hard to build resiliency, with that. And what you learn is the world's not safe and I'm not okay. And that's how you start out. Yeah, some of us start out like that from day 2, others from age 3, others experience that when they go to school. They might have a rather safe environment at home, but then they go to school and they're bullied, beaten up, or ostracized, or whatever.
Right.
Or they go and have a huge car accident, driving somewhere with your aunt, and your nervous system never recuperates from that because nobody addressed the shock in your
Right.
system. They just talk to you.
And usually, let me ask you this question. Do you find that most of it, not all of us, have some kind of event that
Sure.
precipitates that sense of, I'm afraid I don't belong?
Well, we all do because it's part of life. Then it always depends on,
Is it really part of life? Go
it's
back
a
to the
part,
default
no,
settings,
yeah,
right? Or is
yeah,
it something
yeah,
that
yeah.
we've accepted as part of life because that's how we've experienced the outer world?
Yeah, valid question. So let's say you grew up in a tribe where it is known that a mother that is pregnant should not experience stress because it is known that then the baby also already gets sort of formed with a nervous system that is under duress, right? We forgot that in our society. We forgot that. So if that already would be a huge step to take care of pregnant women, okay? Because it would already eliminate a lot of trauma to begin with, or being wired with the nervous system. So having so many children that are already wired, are born with a compromised nervous system.
Now, this
Then the
brings up
other
another
thing,
point before you get into that, if you could hold that, because I think this is a point that really needs to be addressed.
mm,
The minimalization of women, the subversion of their equanimity to men. And it started in many places, but one in particular that I find is still present today, and we don't even realize it happened, is through scripture, right? We're taught that women are made from men, which makes them immediately subservient. Why? Right? That's a patriarchal bullshit system that we're still living under, and we can't figure out why we've created the mess because we're not willing to address it. And now this, empowered women are stepping up and saying, hey, wait a minute, we can function. We may not be as strong as you or other things, but we've got some
physically strong.
equanimity because of what we know, how we can do, and the respect that we deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. So we might not be physically as strong, but most women endure
Emotionally, I
things
mean, you
that most
raise the
men,
children, right?
yeah.
Find a guy that's strong enough to raise a family by himself.
Yeah.
That's
Very
rare.
few.
There are the
Very, very.
exceptions, but it's rare.
Yeah. Yeah. So women endure a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Now
but
back
it's
to the
not
point,
only,
right? Sorry
yeah,
for the
yeah, but you
interruption.
see, it's not only that system, it's also that women are forced to keep working if they don't want to, or even if they're not healthy enough to work while they're pregnant,
Yeah.
because
Capitalist
economy or
system.
money is a top priority. So it's not just a hierarchical system, it's also that the value of life. I mean, if you think that a pregnant woman is actually creating life, recreating more life on this planet, that is not valued. It's not valued, okay, in the way it should be. But if it were, women would be protected.
Yeah. Well, it's devalued on the realms of population control, right? And there are those who say that, oh, we don't have enough to feed who we have currently. And then there's others who've done a little more study and look at the planet and its capability and say, wait a minute, we got plenty of space and ability to feed others and grow the population without much constraint. We just don't choose to do it. We're in this scarcity complex of capitalism.
Yes, that might be one point, and but I just want to
Yeah, from
also
one
stress,
perspective, and I realize there's many.
yeah, there's from that perspective, and there, but there's also as I know quite a few fundamentalistic Christians that you know ask their women to have one child after the other because that's God's will.
Right.
I'm I'm very opposed to that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, use good sense, right? If I, I think that says it all, right? When you look at things and determine, you don't have to follow prescriptive methodologies just because they're tradition. You've got choice. You can look at things and make different choices.
Yeah.
How do we? Because that's where the trauma is. We don't make the choices because of the trauma in most places, right? Would you say that would be true?
Well, I believe that there's a huge amount of trauma in this world, and that we carry also a lot of ancestral trauma,
Hmm.
and that is sort of, I can only make that movement. It's sort of, if I mean what trauma science says now, that really up to 7 generations, children can carry traits of trauma that their ancestors experienced, and
And
that
this is
very
how
often
native,
that. Hmm?
and this is how natives look. It's seven generations prior and 7 generations in the future before making any major decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And it is like, sometimes I work with clients and they have fears or patterns that they actually say, I have no idea. Nothing of that kind has happened in my life. But let's say, I mean, it's just odd. Every time I pass a window, I'm afraid I'm going to get shot. Somebody in Western Europe, it's very unlikely. But if you go back 2 or 3 generations in the war, your ancestor might actually have been shot and really severely injured. And if that person then, has children, some of the children might actually inherit that event,
Right.
not precisely, but that
Right.
fear. And then you
Right.
say, well, I don't understand why I have that. I never lived in a violent area, but it determines my life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Or
Sheldrake brought that out decades ago, right? The means and creeds that we carry from culture and bloodlines and all of those
absolutely.
kinds of things that are layers of our being.
Yeah, and I think in this time of transformation, these things are beginning to be addressed because we need to get rid of layers and layers and layers of the ancestral trauma and our own trauma between countries. You know, take
Mhm.
Germany and France. They'd been at war for centuries, or England and France, or you know, what happened in the United States with the indigenous people and the population that now, you know, is the majority there.
Right.
That needs
Europeans
to
came here
heal.
and wiped out a whole population. Well, not
Yeah,
wiped
well,
out,
hell
but
yes.
definitely became the dominant culture.
Yes, but the trauma is still there,
Oh, yeah.
you know. So, and that all these things, I think in the next, don't know how long it will take, but that needs to be addressed and that needs to heal because otherwise, you know, to tie it back to the discussion we had at the beginning, that sensitivity for frequencies, for heartfelt connections, it always needs to go through that junk. And what's the English word for that? You know, the dirt of the trauma.
Hmm.
And you know, if you ask trauma therapists all across the world, they say that is the most important job that we actually have if we want peace on this planet, is to work through these layers and layers and layers of trauma and misconceptions and how we treat pregnant women and how we educate our children at school so that we get a population that is not so weighed down by um, by patterns that are not helpful.
Mm. So what I hear you saying is we need a general upwising.
Yes, we need a house cleaning and better housekeeping. If you want to.
Now, in that, well, and it just makes sense too, right? We've learned all the separative notions and we've extended that rubber band so far that it's almost broken. I think with this last couple of years or a few years that we've had when we were, sequestrated and um, distanced so far, we couldn't even see our families, even if they were dying, right? Um, Now, like you, my wife and I were rebels here. We never thought a thing, never acted differently, lived as life was normal to us, didn't apply any constrictions to our behavior, our faces, our bodies, or anything, and both our businesses grew
Mm,
during that time. So that's the experience we had based on our own truth of what we believed and saw,
mm,
rather
mm,
than what was projected and prescribed for our behavior. So that brought a lot of dissensions with others as well, especially going into a store unmasked and everybody's masked. And they look at you sideways and you just smile and grin and you say something silly and you can see people's eyes turn up, right? Where
well,
they're
here,
actually looking for something to be happy about and you smile even though you can't see it. So
yeah,
those
that's
kinds
true.
of things were
Well,
happening.
we here you couldn't go into a store without a mask. I couldn't go to a restaurant. I couldn't go to theater. I couldn't go to the movies. I mean, it was really, um, you know, and people were really,
Confined.
huh?
It was confining.
Well, it wasn't, I mean, it was, people would call you all kinds of names. They would, you know, call you the dirt of society and they would call you a threat to society. And, you know, like I said, I couldn't go and see my friends. I
Hmm.
couldn't.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah.
one of the things I've befriended Howard Bloom, who wrote the book, The Lucifer Principle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. One of the most brilliant minds on the planet. What he did was a scientific study of humanity and how small groups of people manipulated populations by telling lies and controlling the media. And it's happened throughout history,
Yeah,
still is.
it still is.
And this is the result of it. So back to the uprising, right? The question of why did this happen? How could we let this happen?
Yeah, I think that is the more interesting question. why did this happen? I think we're pretty clear on what the mechanisms behind that are. But what is flabbergasting to me is how can so many people not get it?
Right. Well, again, back to those default settings. We want to trust in those who appear to be an authority. And
Yeah.
so we follow them almost, at the threat of our lives in some cases, right?
Mm,
And we send our kids off to die in situations like that. Why? Why can't we just say, okay, I'm not going to support the killing of others, period? What would happen then? Because we bought into the system. America especially, our defense budget runs America's economy.
I know.
We don't recognize that. It does. That's the reason they feel so threatened with peace and have to
I know.
continue this escalation of acquisition. We're like Ferengi, only a little more destructive in the process.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, destructive with the lives of others, not their own children. They don't send their own children to war, the children of
right.
other
And
people.
yet others believe in that. They support it. They will acquiesce to this theme of something that they really don't feel good about, but yet, oh, this is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, because that's the system is teaching you from kindergarten to university, you being sort of, we would call it indoctrinated
Hmm.
with certain belief. And then let's say, we are community animals. That's what we are as
Sure.
human beings. Yeah, apart from the spirit part. It is very threatening to not belong. When you did not belong to the community, it usually meant death. You know, doesn't mean that necessarily now, but it used to,
Well,
because you
like
could
with
not.
Constantine, when he canonized the Bible or had his scribes canonize it, it was a bridging of church and state under threat of death if you did not adhere.
Yeah, and but people adhere because as a community, let's call it animals, because that's what we are in
Mhm.
physical plane. We depend on community. If we do not have community, we do not survive. Okay, because probably most of us couldn't kill a lion on our own. We can't forage for food on our own. We need to to be close to other
Mhm.
human beings or other beings.
And to have
So
the division of labor.
no. What I'm trying to say here is
I
that,
understand that. I'm saying, and in addition to that.
yeah, in addition to that, of course, but it is highly threatening. I mean, it was the worst thing other than getting killed was to be excluded from the tribe because it was basically a death sentence. So we still, all of us carry that fear of, well, if I don't belong, if I go against the grain of the majority of the opinion, then that part in ourselves says I'm going to die. So that's, I think, why most people follow these insane rules, sometimes even without questioning, because that priority of I need to belong to a community, I need to be accepted and be part of it is
Mhm.
huge.
Mhm. And now we have a lot of morals that have been put into law that include aggression on all kinds of levels. And one of the so I happened as a result of one of my interviews with a guest a couple of or 3 years ago, I was asked to join a global peace movement called Live and Let Live.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, right? That's just the epitome of live and let live. So we have two principles: live and let live. The live is about a moral side of things, of acquiescing to greater standards, being an excellent human, whatever that may look like in, individual cases. And then there's a legal principle, which is don't aggress. And the long-term vision, mission, if you will, purpose, is to actually calibrate the law to remove aggression. Now, imagine what could happen if we collectively got to a place where we could do that.
Yeah, fine by me. Again, it will take the will of the majority of the people to change, to want to change. And from my perspective, as somebody who works with trauma, as long as we carry so much trauma, that will be very difficult, because our nervous systems will seek safety in aggression many times. So,
right, because it's something we can control.
well, it is something you can control when you've healed it, but not if it's not healed.
True. And oftentimes that emotional trauma will cause an unleashing of unbridled energy in an aggressive response rather than a pause and reflection before responding.
You don't have that luxury. If you really have deep trauma,
The
that
triggers.
part of your brain is always faster than any kind of reflection.
Yeah,
It just turns off your prefrontal cortex, and anything else, it just goes on in survival mode.
sure. And it does
And
happen so quick. You're right. I've heard the speed of thought is like 841 trillion miles per second.
yeah, and the speed of fear, I don't know the exact number, is a lot faster than that. A lot faster than that. So, if you have trauma and you have somebody who disagrees with you, just to put it very simply, and you feel threatened, the quickest way out is to hit them. It's not to discuss with them,
Right. Yeah,
right?
either hit him or argue or yell or,
Do
express your,
something
yeah,
aggressive in order to protect your own body, your own
right.
boundary, right? Only a
Absolutely.
healed, only a healed person, or a person that doesn't carry trauma in that arena, will say, okay, take a breath in and take one out, and let's just see how we can solve this in a different way.
It's like you talked about that group of people, that multicultural group of people, right? That those who get it when something tries to, poke the bear, so to speak,
Right.
they will pause rather than engage. And if it's pertinent, then they'll engage. If it's not, if it's bullshit, like we were talking about earlier, then they don't do anything unless it gets to a point where it's affecting the wah of the group, the chi,
Mm.
whatever. And then they'll say something because it's got to that point where it needs to be done. That energy needs to shift, and they're astute enough to feel and sense the need and respond to it because of their self-awareness and awareness of others.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
How do you see that kind of process evolving in how we are co-creating this new normal coming out of the pandemic and as we look into this future that's trauma-filled and unknown and yet full of potential?
Yeah. So my special take on that, or that is that I think that the neurosensitives are the ones that need to get a lot of this job done, because we have a very special set of skills that allow us to build something different than a linear, hierarchical, aggressive world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to, we can get into that. So I believe that the traits that many neurosensitives carry are the traits of the new world. Sense of community, high empathy, the ability for complex thinking, to be innovative, to be very good communicators, to be the ones that put a finger on something's off here. I can sense something's off here. And the particular group that I like to work with are the ones that then say, okay, I'm going to lead change here. I'm going to actually pick this up and say, I'm not just going to complain about it or say I can feel and sense it. I'm going to get organized about this.
Mm-hmm. That's what my dad used to, he says, don't ever point a finger unless you got three solutions in hand because you got three fingers pointing back at you.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah. Right.
It's amazing the simple default settings that we can restore by doing those kinds of activities and understanding what we do anywhere, we do everywhere, whether we can see the pattern or not, others do. It's just being able to reflect and adjust accordingly. How do you see that emergence of, okay, I'm going to take responsibility. I see something that needs to be done. That means I got to go do it. And that kind of mentality rather than, oh, I see it, but I don't want to waste my time.
Well, maybe because of, like some people say, the frequency on the planet is getting higher and higher and higher. So the people that are of that type to say, I see something and I will do something, get a lot more supported. I don't know if it's that or if it's just that it's so unjust and chaotic the way our world is organized now, that more and more people actually understand we can't wait for governments or big institutions to change things. We need to do it. And I see more
Exactly.
and more people, coming up like mushrooms saying, we need to change the school system. We need to change the health system. And I have an idea. And it's still being suppressed a lot because as a rule, they don't get a lot of money to develop their things. But I see it. I see a shift. I sense and I feel a shift in this.
Sure. Now also, and I do too, and I love that you see that. What I want to draw attention is how we see that the changes that we can initiate and that inside systems, they are inherently going to be self-protective. They're going to want to keep the status quo because that's how they're designed. And yet, you can't stand outside a system and change it. There's the observation of the changes that are necessary, but in order to change it, you still have to move into it. This is one of the things of politics. Nobody wants to get involved with politics because they suck because of the activity inside of it. Now, if we're going to change it, then we have to step into it. We have to bring who we are, our being, our default settings into that environment and start raising the vibe because we've shown up and we're calling attention to the things that are awry and not just complaining. We can bitch and moan all we want, right? That doesn't change a word or a thing.
No,
What
it
we
doesn't.
have to do is be involved. And the apathy of people has been extreme up until recently.
Until recently. And I would add what I also see, because we could have a long talk about systems now. I see that people are beginning to build systems outside of the systems that we have, because some of the systems we have are so closed and so self-feeding that by doing what you suggested to go into that system and try to change it, it has not worked. And it doesn't work many times. It might work sometimes. And what I see is that people are just saying, okay, just let that be wherever it is, and we build something new next to it. And that people are
Yeah, it's
beginning.
like Bucky, right? Or even Socrates said, you can't fight something, can't change something by fighting it. You got to create something that's better.
Yeah.
Now, there's still that segue, right? And this is back to my point is that I know what I said sounded like, I mean, that you have to go into the system. That doesn't mean you can't create another system that then provides that liminal space for the two to merge
Absolutely.
and to have a better outcome.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we all know that, there needs to be space and time in order to transform things. But before that, what I saw was that you had these insular people building something else. And what I see now is that there are networks between these insular systems that people are so fed up with the way the old systems work that they actually begin to not be so fixed in that depression or this, oh, well, inshallah, this is just how the world is, that they're beginning to see, no. This
Well, and
needs
this
some
goes
contribution.
This speaks to the whole motivation behind Planetary Citizens, which is a nonprofit organization that my wife and I began. Actually, I began with planetarycitizens.net over a decade and a half ago, but we just
Mhm.
got nonprofit status. Now, what I do with it from a systems perspective is I look at a holistic picture, and specifically the co-creation wheel
Mm.
that came out of spiral dynamics.
Mhm.
That seems to have one of the best population relationship kind of escalation or ascension processes. So
Yeah.
in each of those 12 sectors of the co-creation wheel, there are people, places, and things that are looking, that are futurists, and they're looking for these things. They're not connected. They're silos currently because they've been doing the work, like you said, on their
Mhm.
own, unaware of anybody else. They just see something needs to be done. They're going to do it, but they're not aware of anybody else who's working on the same thing. Some are. What we're seeking to do is bring that into a focus of exploding those sectors, who's doing what, giving people individual suggestions as to what they can do within each one of those sectors, activity-wise,
Mhm.
and then creating collectives where we acknowledge and showcase those who are at the forefront in each one of those sectors around the world and show that at least a model of virtually how these might intersect and integrate.
I love that. I love that. And that's how it's going to be. We're going to be more and more and more connected. And then at some point, I think it always says you need about 30% of the population, and then the other
Mhm.
60 that are sort of in the
Yeah, we
middle,
don't
that
know
will
what
come
that
along.
tipping point is going to be. We just know it exists.
It exists, and some people say it's these 30%, some say it's 15, I don't know, but
Some say 10.
yeah, I don't
I've heard
know.
3%. Again, that goes back to what Bloom found out, right? Small group of people manipulating masses through telling lies. What if that small group of people manipulated masses by telling the truth?
Yeah, but the problem is that it's still being suppressed by the media, meaning it needs to have a significant amount of people, or I think it needs the
We have
higher
less
amount of
impact
people,
now
so
because of the
that
internet.
they cannot control the information flow anymore the way I have. And I think we are almost there.
Mhm.
I think we are
Well, Google
almost at
just got dinged because of
huh?
their monopoly.
Yeah. But I know so many people that still, when they watch the news, they believe everything they're being told. I mean, to me, that is unfathomable. I'm like, how
Mhm.
can you possibly?
Yeah,
But they do.
they do.
And that needs to change. And that when I believe that awareness, because of, at least in Germany, the severity of the lockdowns and the idiocy of it has begun people to become more aware of the information they're actually being fed. I mean, we have now things coming out here, that people sort of say, really? And
Well,
I'm
the
like,
Olympics, the opening ceremony. Really?
really?
I mean,
And I
that
know many
just
people who thought it's
seems,
wonderful. A lot of people said it was great.
but if you look at what was presented, first of all, the exclusion of others, which is not what the Olympics is about. That's bottom line. And then
Hmm.
there's this, hmm,
Hmm.
some good things, like the green efforts that were made, even though the athletes didn't appreciate it. Well, that's probably going to happen to the majority of us because we're not going to be as comfy as we used to be when we start thinking about, okay, what's best for the planet?
Sure.
Now we'll eventually get back to the comfy spot, but there's going to be some uncomfort. That's where we grow.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
speaking
true.
of growing, and we're about out of time, I really appreciate this conversation. This has just been
Mm.
amazing. And
Thank you.
I think we both have benefited, and I know our audience will if they just tune in, right? Or stick with us, um, or have stuck with us. What can you offer in a tasty nugget or tasty tidbit, something that people can do on a daily basis or moment to moment when they have that inkling of, oh, here I'm in trauma. What do I do?
Well, I think it with trauma, and then it depends on the severity of it.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's very difficult to work through it on your own because your body has so many mechanisms trying to protect you from really getting in touch with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would advise to really seek professional help, and especially somebody who works with the body or the energy system, because that's where most of the trauma is actually stored. And never judge yourself for it. I think that is one of the most important things, whether you have panic attacks or social anxieties or any other sort of weird symptoms that you're struggling with.
Right.
Never judge yourself
Now,
for it.
would you say that, and that's a great point, never ever judge yourself. Would you say that by intending to seek help, it will arrive?
That's my life experience.
Okay. I just want to validate that. It's mine too, right? It's the attention, intention, and interactions that we make and the focus and discipline of maintaining them.
But
However,
we
just
can
that.
also use our mental plane, and that is to say, what we know about trauma now is book therapy is not going to do it. So be wise about that as well, and do your due diligence. Check, whom you're going to work with, whether these are people who actually are at the
Mm-hmm.
leading
Trust
edge.
your gut.
Trust your gut, but also understand that
Your gut
there's
may be a
also
little filtered.
an informed choice. Make an
Yes.
informed choice, and then decide with your gut on top of it.
Yeah. Well, it seems kind of silly not to look for information, evidence, recommendations, all those kinds of things, because that's part of what we are capable of doing, and then use the filter, use the gut, right?
Exactly.
What makes sense here? Um, and you'll be led. Cool.
So thank you for this conversation.
Oh, it's just been phenomenal for me and some areas that I've hoped to get into that we hadn't yet. So I truly appreciate the insight and wisdom that you've brought to this apocalyptic chat.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And namaste and in la catch. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I'll see you next time.